Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Excellent. We wanted to wait a few extra minutes because we heard traffic was extra awful tonight. It was? Okay. I'm glad we were able to do that. I'm Michelle Rich. I am the Ellen and Harry S. Parker III Associate Curator of Indigenous American Art, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, I'd like to thank the 𝗕𝗀𝗁 family for funding the 𝗕𝗀𝗁 Family Lecture Series on archaeology. As a trained archaeologist myself, of course, these lectures are always my favorites. Anything having to do with the Americas, and particularly ancient America, is where my heart lies. So I'm very excited this evening to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Orlando Hernández Ying. He has dedicated over 20 years to museums and higher education. In his native Panama, Dr. Hernández Ying was the head curator of the Anthropology Museum there and held the position of National Coordinator of Museums, where he oversaw 18 museums across the country. His trajectory in the US includes collaborations with MoMA, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Dallas Museum of Art, the Walters Museum, and the Historic New Orleans Collection. Hernández Ying has taught at NYU, CUNY, Tulane University, and the National University of Panama. His academic training includes an MA in Museum Studies from NYU and a doctoral degree in Art History and Criticism from the CUNY Graduate Center. As curatorial associate at the Hispanic Society Museum and Library, Hernández Ying conducts research on several topics from ancient to modern art in the Americas. His essay, In Absence of the Written Word, Ancient Gold in the Istmo-Colombian Area, is included in the book entitled The Arts of the Ancient Americas at the Dallas Museum of Art. And in the words of tonight's speaker, who wrote his own bio, the book is hot off the presses and available now. So if you're interested in learning more about the Dallas Museum of Art's collection or reading Dr. Hernández Ying's essay, the book is available in our gift shop, which is unfortunately not open tonight, but you can also order it off of Amazon. So with that, please help me give a warm welcome to Dr. Orlando Hernández Ying.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for that introduction. I want to also give my share of gratitude to the Dallas Museum of Art for this invitation, not only to write this essay for the catalog, to Michelle Rich for this extraordinary effort that started during the pandemic to put all of these together, all this material together, and then working it and editing it with 𝗕𝗏𝗁𝗏 also, not present, but also like who I work with in close contact to get all this material sharpened up to be good for print, and the 𝗕𝗀𝗁 family, and of course the Nora and John Weiss for this extraordinary collection that I had the opportunity to study here at the Dallas Museum of Art. So to all of them, my gratitude, to Christina, JD, and all the people that make this visit possible. I also would like to extend my gratitude. So today I'm going to talk about something that is fills me with a lot of pleasure as well, but at the same time, it's part of my trajectory as an art historian, because I from the beginning, I tried to be an academic in the art of the viceregal or colonial, Spanish colonial Americas. But, and I did pre-Columbian, or as we call it before, pre-Columbian, now we call it Asian Americas, and I'm gonna give you a brief tutorial on all the terminology that has changed and has been updated lately. But then, you know, in Panama we say that, well, that's not a good analogy, but we say that la cabra siempre tira para el monte. So that means that the goat always kind of wants to go back into the mountain. But it's a colloquial way, it's a vernacular way of saying that you cannot run away from your roots. And this is the case as well. So I think that Panamanian gold, in one way or another, even if my advisor in graduate school was trying to make this my area of expertise, and I didn't do it because of lack of documentation, documentation in the written word that would leave an empty gap in my in my psyche, I decided to do Spanish colonial, which was my first love as I was growing up. But what I decided doing was to learn about the indigenous input into the Spanish colonial world, and in so doing, I did a lot of coursework in ancient American civilizations and cultures. So I did a vast, many courses on ancient American art from the Andes, Mesoamerica, and the 𝗕𝘀𝗁𝗵𝗺 area, and so on. And I'm so glad I did, because now I feel, as the more I dig into the part of it that I have dedicated some research into, I feel that I am connecting more and probably reading in between the lines, that even despite of that lack of documentary, documental information, we are able, or I am able, to understand it better, and perhaps like with that interconnection with other cultures, we can fill in the gaps that documents unfortunately can't provide. So first of all, let's identify this terminology that I was talking to you about. We used to call that, well, we don't call it pre-Columbian art anymore, because obviously it doesn't address the subject matter as we have, as we thought about it before. Everything was organized around this Eurocentric vision, and pre-Columbian actually means before Columbus, and we cannot identify things by what they are not. So based on that premise, we should identify these civilizations or these cultures by what they are. So if they're in Mesoamerica or Middle America, that makes sense. If they're in the Andes, it's a geographical area, so that identifies what they are. But the intermediate area, which was the name that it was used to address these cultures before, does only address the fact that they were in between the big empires of the Andes, meaning the Inca, for the, if we refer to the ones that were at the cusp of their civilization, or were in existence upon the arrival of Europeans, and in Mesoamerica with the Aztecs. So the intermediate area was in between those two big empires, or those big spheres where empires developed. But that also, as I was mentioning before in a brief gallery talk that we had before this occasion, and I'm going to use the term again, pre-Columbian was in the periphery of what we have studied in art history as the main course that is usually Eurocentric, based on classicism, that is the art of Greece and Rome, followed by the medieval period, and then eventually by the Renaissance, the Baroque, and so on, but all centered in the creation of Europe and the Mediterranean, and then all the arts of the Americas at that time, or still, were on the periphery of, conceptually speaking, of that body of knowledge. And then intermediate area was on the periphery of that conceptual knowledge. And that is something that we have to slowly start merging it, or moving from the use of that terminology, so it can fall finally into this use. It can be colloquially used, as perhaps for the sake of trying to get a conversation going, but in terms of academically speaking and addressing people in a museum environment, or even like using it for writing, we should definitely discard that terminology in favor of the art of the ancient Americas. Because in fact, when we start comparing what is going on in the Americas, it has more commonalities with what is happening in ancient Greece and Rome than what is happening somewhere else. And it makes total sense to use this terminology in a more accurate way. In the same way, the intermediate area, which doesn't really address any location or any particular element that identifies these cultures, we have replaced with 𝗕𝘀𝗁𝗵𝗺 area. The isthmus, referring to the Central American isthmus, an isthmus, just to have everyone on the same page, is a body of land that divides two bodies of water. But we call Panama the isthmus, and it's like a name that we can use indistinctively to address the country of Panama. But if we think about it in real terms, in geographical terms, the whole area of Central America is an isthmus. So the 𝗕𝘀𝗁𝗵𝗺 area actually refers to the entire isthmus of Central America, as you can see on the map, and then the northern rim of Colombia, that is the one that is attached to the rest of the area by the Caribbean. So what we're really talking about is that the Caribbean, as one of the main archaeologists that have been dealing with this terminology lately, John Hoopes, has addressed, the Caribbean becomes like the Mediterranean of the Americas. This is the exchange channel that these peoples from different latitudes are communicating through. And we're not only talking about seafaring endeavors, but also intercoastal and riverine or fluvial networks that I'm gonna address soon enough. The interesting thing is that the communication that is going on in terms of, among these different peoples that inhabit this vast area of land happens among people that are not talking the same language, that they live very in different geographical spaces that until now, we are beginning to understand that they were more interconnected than what we care to accept. And usually because we have, I think also, a misconception, a misunderstanding of what indigenous peoples are. And we are thinking that they are isolated, that they are unable to speak with or interact with people from other languages. We're thinking that they're limited in their mobility because the lack of the wheel. We're thinking that perhaps they were not active outside very limited spheres of interaction, geographically speaking, in terms of distance. And all of these things, we have to reevaluate and think that they were more interconnected than what we suppose based on the examples or the stylistic examples I'm going to show you through the work of metallurgy. In this map of Colombia, we can see all the different languages that they speak just within the Colombian borders. So this is really marvelous that we can look at some objects that have very deep significance and have deep connections with each other among people that do not share the same linguistic roots. For the most part, the Istmo-Colombian area, especially in the areas of Colombia and Panama, are known to speak some sort of 𝗕𝗀𝘁 or 𝗕𝗀𝘁 language, but this can be very uneven, let's call it that way, because we have people that are living, within the same geographical area in the Chocó area between Panama and Colombia, and they're speaking different languages. So for the most part, we're talking about a heterogeneous groups of people speaking heterogeneous languages, but however, they have a pan-regional identity or elements of identity that interconnect one with the other. But before we start the story of gold, we have to go back in time and geographically also move towards the Andes in the area of Chavín de Huántar between Peru and Bolivia mainly, and this marvelous crown that we have here in the collection of the Dallas Museum of Art is the perfect example to start our discussion or our study of these of gold as a way of communication among the people from the ancient Americas. The crown is a work that has been, well, first of all, I have to backtrack in terms of the technology of gold, and these works are not exclusively made out of gold. Gold is a very brittle material, and it's very malleable and soft once it's heated. So if it's worked in its pure form, it would be very brittle and it would break easily. So it was usually found, and it was usually amalgamated with copper in an amalgam called guanin in the Caribbean and tumbaga in mainland Central America and Colombia. It obviously had two, if we think about it in cosmological terms, it has the components of both earth and sky. The copper representing the earth coming from the underworld, and the sun, represented in the gold with an untarnishable and always, glittery or shiny surface. So it was the perfect material to evoke divinity, to evoke the cosmological importance of certain people, certain people that embodied hierarchies within the the groups in which they lived. And these hierarchies were attained by means of war, or usually ceremonial war or ceremonial combat among people, sometimes from the same culture, but in a way to establish the hierarchy or the importance of each leader in order to make the decisions that regulated either life in of a community or the use of natural resources within a certain geographical area. In this case, we see the staff god, which is a god that is represented with supernatural features, usually embodied or usually accompanied by fangs, claws. The fangs usually associated to felines or other predatory animals. The claws also through avian birds of prey, or birds of prey. And also in this case, it has emanations of snakes coming out from the head, the waistline, and sometimes even the feet. The two staffs have been represented in other occasions and sometimes in other cultures with decapitated heads. So that was the ultimate symbol of domination between the clans. And this is another element that is also prevalent right from the beginning of the creation of these works, that not only as metallurgy was crafted and the dissemination of the technology moved northbound into Ecuador and then Colombia and then Panama, it apparently from the beginning, and as I'm going to show with later examples, it was not taught or it was not learned just as a technique to make things. It was also taught with the knowledge of this cosmovision, of these symbols of power, as we're going to see with later examples. So we're looking at a frontally depicted figures, sometimes a spread eagle, sometimes very heraldic in a frontal figure. In this case, it also has like an upturned snout that I have associated not only, well, it has been later on and in other latitudes has been called the alligator god. I think it is it's more like a combination of several animals of prey and or predatory animals, and in this case also has the features of a bat with an upturned snout. But we're going to see more examples of it. One of the things that is really remarkable about 𝗕𝗏𝗵𝗺 de Huántar, however, is that the composition of the body is made out of a clenched fangs or clenched mouth. So you can see that in the center of the figure, over here, the chest is composed of a fang, and on the knees are also composed of profiles of a figure that combined together also make a frontal mask-like fanged animal or fang figure. And this makes me think about the principles of design that were, and this is another thing that I find remarkable. We're talking about a work of art that was made between 800 and 200 before the Common Era. And the system in which these objects are going to be designed is still follow the same or very similar concepts and principles of design. So this is something that works for art historians, because we start thinking, or we start like making a diagnostic or understanding how things are designed, how is the human mind thinking about putting these objects together, or what do they represent? So first of all, what we see is that the outlines are very important. So the importance of the outline and outlining all that design is heavily important in this art form. But also what they call the contour rivalry. So we are not only looking at the designs from a face value, but we also have to look at the negative space of them. And in this case, for example, it works with the fangs that I just mentioned in the legs of the image. So we're looking at the knees, or probably what should be the knees or the legs, and we're looking at the profile of a figure, but then when we have the two profiles together, we look at the frontal line. So that is called contour rivalry. It's telling us two things at the same time. The other element of design that is, or the principle of design that is prevalent in these works of art is what we call pars pro toto, or a part that represents the whole. So that means that just like a cube that tells us an eye or a rectangle or a fang, tells us that it stands in for the presence of the entire design, whether it's a being or an animal or another figure that is present. And so those are the three most important ones that we see, pars pro toto, the outlines, and the contour rivalry are three of the most important principles that we're going to be looking at that consecutively reappear in the creation of works of metallurgy, not only in the Andes, but also in the Istmo-Colombian area further along the line with the migration of the technology of gold as it moves northward. Moving on with the Chavin artwork, we have these two bracelets as well that continue with that contour rivalry and the combination of contours creating new forms like these two over here, that the two profiles become like a mask altogether, and also create a design in the shape of a diamond that I'm still looking into some similar designs that occur in the Istmo-Colombian area, but I'm still working on finding how they connect with each other. As we move on, and this is still within the area of the Andes, in this case, 𝗕𝘀𝗵𝗺𝗃 in the north coast of Peru, so we see that these systems remain very strong within their geographical area, as well as the technology of gold migrates to the north. We see that, again, the same frontal image of the leader with two severed heads or two, praise or loot of what he has achieved through war. In this case, it's represented over a litter. The litter may have either emanations of snakes or birds, but the same principle, representing the leader frontally, and sometimes if they're assistants, they're represented in profile, but always underscoring the importance and the hierarchy of the main figure. Eventually, as this moves forward, we have that, let's say, a vernacular development of the technology of gold to represent or to create symbols, usually as from what I've seen, usually in the form of nose rings or ear ornaments that could actually help identify members from one group and the other. So, immediately when you see that, when the indigenous people that interacted with each other would see, a type of ear ornament or nose ring, they could identify that person as part of a given clan, group, or ethnicity. But at the same time, so there are two parallel currents going on. The one that creates that type of ornaments and the types of ornaments that actually refer to hierarchical people or people within a hierarchy, important people within the clan, as the ones that we saw in Chavin de Huántar and Sican. So this one, I think, most probably belongs to a person of a certain hierarchy. The bigger that they get, and the flashier that they get, and also if they have designs and you can see the small designs on the rim, on the lower rim of this half moon design, may actually refer to someone of certain importance within the clan. So we have these two systems going on along a vernacular one and a supra or regional system that is actually associated to a semi-divine or perhaps divine cosmovision among the people of the entire area of the region. Moving forward, we have ear spools also from Calima, the size and level of craftsmanship. Also, these are upstairs, and they're really beautiful examples of Calima gold work. Also hard or tell us about the hierarchy or the importance of the wearer. And whereas these ear ornaments that are more common are probably the ones that that could be associated to the common folk and would help identify the members of a clan or a group. The same happens with the Senu ornaments that they can go either way. They can be like, and these are really interesting types of ornaments, because in one end we have a very clunky, kind of like very volumetric, solid one on the left, and then a false filigree one on the right. And this false filigree were not actually coils that were intertwined. All of that is done in wax. And that actually leads me into talking about the technique in which this was made. So there are different ways to create these metallurgical wonders. One is basically melting the gold and making sheets of gold, like the crown of 𝗕𝗀𝗵𝗺 de Guantar, and then cutting through it and then with another sharp tool, creating the volumes and hammering and chiseling the volumes within that flat surface. The other one is the lost wax technique. So it's creating a core of wax, of clay, and then on top of that you have a layer of wax, and then putting all of that in another container, let's say another mold of clay, and pouring the hot metal through channels into the space where that wax is occupying. So the hot metal would melt the wax, and hence, therefore the name, the wax is lost, and then it would take the place of the wax with all its intricacies and minimal details, as you can see this. So these are called false filigree, because they are all made of wax components that were pressed into a mold, and then the molten metal is poured inside to get this like almost like lace-like structures in gold, which is extremely marvelous. At this detail, they're only, as far as I know, they're only done among the Zenú, but we also have examples of false filigree in Panama as well. As we move forward, we have this, for you to have a geographic idea of where these objects are being produced, we have in yellow the location of the cultures that have created some of the objects that I have just shown you. So we made a big jump actually from the Andean highlands. We have the intermediary culture of La Tolita in Ecuador that for the most part have produced discs in gold and sometimes platinum for some reason. We have to understand also that the ores don't come like separated in nature. They all come together, like clump together. So most of the times what we are really looking at are really like composites of things that have many metals, or obviously the amount of gold is superior to everything else, but sometimes and copper, but sometimes they have silver and even platinum inside, within the same amalgam. So we have Quimbaya, Zenú, and Tayrona, and we see the proximity of these areas with the Gulf of Urabá, which is located over here, and then with the Isthmus of Panama, and then also with the Caribbean. So we can infer that the portability of gold would actually would be naturally exported to all of these areas. But one thing is to exchange things, and the other thing is to really learn how to make them, and the other thing is to really embody what the content or the message of these works are. And this is the part that I think that gold takes the place of the written word, because it helps perhaps with mnemotechnical it helps us a mnemotechnical device to learn about the narratives that are associated to these works of art. Unfortunately, it's lost to us, but in some way we can piece together that we're talking about perhaps the same deity or the same figure that has all of these, or the same way of representing a leader of a clan that is usually represented with through the partial representation of animals, birds of prey, or birds of prey, or snakes and alligators. Now, the way in which these things travel is also important, and this is something that archaeologists have been paying attention lately more closely, and it's the riverine or fluvial interconnections of these people. And in the case of Colombia, which is a vast country on its own, we have three main river interconnections between one place and the other. The first one is the Magdalena River, and you can see how it goes from, south all the way to Barranquilla in the Caribbean and all the places that it actually touches. And this river is so vast and also very important, even in the colonial period, to transport things into the mainland of Colombia, with its, pouring out into the Barranquilla and the Caribbean. So that's one of the main fluvial networks of how gold may have been, and the technology of gold with the narratives could have been disseminated throughout the land. The second one is the Cauca River, and also it flows from Popayán, from the area of Popayán, also in what became later a very important colonial period cultural center. And you see how it goes all the way to the north and to the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, which is near the Tayrona region. And the Tayrona is a very important, we're gonna see some of the works soon, and we're gonna see how influential they were, especially in the area of Panama. That leads me to think that there was some sort of connection, particularly between the Tayrona and the central area of Panama that is called Veraguas. And the third one is the Atrato River, and that one comes from, also from the highlands in the center, let's say, or deep in Colombia, and it crosses the Darién jungle and the Chocó area into the Urabá Gulf per se. So these three main highways should not be underscored in understanding the full panorama of how these peoples are interacting. We cannot consider the 𝗕𝘀𝘁𝗵𝗺, the 𝗕ci𝗵𝗵𝗺, people that were living in their own little environments, separated by valleys, or separated by mountains, or separated by forests, but people that went to the river, and these exchanges were going on, and they were aware of each other, but also had their own, collective identities within their own clans. The other important thing is that Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo, which was one of the first European explorers of these areas, is actually started in Veraguas in Panama and traveled all the way to the Gulf of Urabá in Colombia, knew how to travel these lands in the best time, under the best conditions, because the Indians in Veraguas told him when was the right time to do it, because of the winds and the currents would help him do that. So if the people in Veraguas already knew that this was of these environmental conditions that favored the traveling to these areas, I don't see why not, there was other ways in which these people were interacting with each other, whether it was a direct contact, which is a little bit harder to, but not impossible, but also intercoastal traveling, going from one beach to the other, from either Veraguas to the Urabá, Gulf of Urabá, or the other way around, depending on how the currents and the winds actually help do that. So we also have to sometimes look into the chronicles of the Europeans, even though we know that they have certain biases and look at it in a different way, to rescue the bits and pieces that help to organize our view or our premise regarding the metallurgy and the dissemination of it throughout the Americas. And then in the first century, as we move forward in the dissemination of metallurgy and the cultural context of these works in the Istmo-Colombian area, I follow what Warwick Bry has denominated the initial period, or the initial style, that ranges from the first to the 5th centuries of our era. And those are identified by objects such as these that can be found from Costa Rica to Panama to Colombia without any difference. So apparently there was a main route, and then, as in Colombia, things disseminated and they created their own vernacular things. Apparently that is also going on throughout the entire area. The other elements that are actually also part of that initial group are the curly-tailed animals that have been a riddle for many archaeologists and art historians, because we're trying to identify what animals are they, but it's impossible because they are not really, they seem to have the tails as as coatis that are something similar to a raccoon, but then the faces look like praying mantises, or the heads look like praying mantises, or little dinosaurs, or little lizards. So we're not really sure, but I think that there are also things that are done just for the, perhaps maybe just like the ornament part of it, and not really like digging into a deeper meaning. But that's another riddle to be solved. So we have other examples, such as this. Also, with the animal pendants, they're usually the holes for to be strung to a necklace are usually on the front legs. So that means that the animals were always looking upwards, kind of like a mirror image of the wearer. So that could also tell us a little bit more about, how they were worn or what they could probably symbolize. Eventually, we have this other work from the 𝗕𝗫𝗁, from the 𝗕়𝗫𝗁 people in the Yotoko sub-region, and these are created between the 1st and 7th centuries. And this one is really interesting because, and remember the two domes that this figure has on its headdress, because this is going to be stylized in what is going to be called the 𝗕 pendant. And that 𝗕 pendant is going to reappear in central Panama and other places. And that's why I think we're talking about the same supernatural being that is being represented across the region. Which leads me to think that eventually, if the conquest hadn't happened, what we're looking at is the formative years of what eventually became empires in South and Mesoamerica would probably have later happened in the Istmo-Colombian area, but that is just a speculation, of course. From this also in the verge of the initial style, or moving into the international style, we have this other curly tail figure, a quadruped with a tail that curls, but then with the beak of a bird. So we know that we are not talking about real animals, but more of a composite of animals. And perhaps, like in the epic poems of Homer, when we talk about, he was fast as a gazelle, or his attack was as swift as a tiger, that's probably what we're talking about. We're talking about metaphors that are embodied by these works of art that talk about certain qualities that are associated with animals. But again, it's open to interpretation. In the international period, we have these extraordinary pendants that actually show perhaps the leader of that. Remember also that they're not only military leaders, but they could be also cosmological leaders or religious leaders at the same time, usually both. And these works show the transformation of these beings. So if we take the upper part, we usually see a human head. Sometimes we see seahorses. And I'm gonna deal with that in a minute. But usually what we see is like a bifurcating, or antlers, or stylized antlers, like deer, bifurcating at the top of the headdress, but in a sort of like forming a crenellation at the top. And then in the bottom, also the feet also bifurcate or divide into two, and with the arms they become like the fins of a turtle. So we see again, something that is, the arms also can be sort of like read as wings, and in some occasions. So we're looking at a human being that is in the process of transformation, whether it's physical or metaphysical, into a being that connects with the world of above, the terrestrial world, and the underworld as well. Then we have, in the same period, we have this hippocampi, which are really interesting because they look even more like in the process of transformation. And I thought, like, what does a seahorse has to do with warfare, or with like a bird of prey, or an animal that inflicts pain? And it has nothing to do with it. But then I saw a video of a seahorse reproducing, and it's the male of the species, the one that actually carries the babies, and it's the one that actually gives birth to the babies. And it's so copious that it's even a little bit, a little too visual to like express in words right here, but you can look at the video on your own on YouTube and you'll see what I'm talking about. So it's not only about warfare, it's not only about ferocity, it's also about being able to create, to have a lot of offspring, to procreate, to have a long lineage of descendants, which is also the reason why perhaps they also include amphibians such as frogs and toads within the menagerie that they have decided to implement in these metallurgic designs. Again, now we have more of a to the taste of naturalistic fans. We have the face of a human being with the stylized antlers of a deer, and then the fins of perhaps a turtle, but then the legs also, the hind legs of a bird, like open as the open eagle shape, and then the upper fins actually could also be read as wings. So we see again that transformative power between the worlds of above, the underworld, and the terrestrial world. And all of these occur between the 5th and the 7th century of our era, and they can be found interspersely, equally in Colombia, Panama, or Costa Rica for the most part. And one of my favorite objects that is here in the Dallas Museum of Art is from the 𝗕𝘀𝘁𝗵𝗵 area, and that is the area that is in between Panama and Costa Rica, and is the one on the left. And we see this other example from the Walters Museum of Art on the right, and we see the same, or well, similar representations of a very important human being with emanations, whether they are snakes in the case of the Walters, or alligators as the ones that we have seen in the gallery above, with the use of spirals. The spirals are very interesting in these works because they are used to as an easy solution, or I would say easy, but at this scale nothing is easy, to be honest. But they can refer to many things. In this case, they are the ears of this saurian or alligator-headed, which, as I said before, it could be an alligator with bat elements. And then on the sides, we see the same or other spirals creating the eyes and the up-curled nose of another profile of an alligator over here. Is the same profile of these looking on the other way. The wings and the legs, and then other upturned, upside down profile of alligators. And this we can see in other elements, especially in the 𝗕ci𝘀𝗵𝗺 head piece that I included in the slideshow that is coming up soon. But then we see another representation of an important being as well, with emanations of snakes and more or less the same saurian or reptilian forms in profile emanating from the hips and the shoulders, and so on. This figure is also important because it has a dipping stick, and it associates this figure with the practices of the muisca and the quimbaya in Colombia, that basically use coca or other hallucinogenic substances combined, and they were dipping it into these poporos, or these little vessels, and then chewing on them, and they had little dipping sticks. So in Panama, where we find some of these objects or little figurines, very smaller, a lot smaller than the ones in Colombia, with sticks, for the longest time, and still today, many people are still calling them like flute players, or they're playing musical instruments, and they're actually getting, a little extra stimulated with hallucinogenic substances. This one is also a very interesting bell from Central Panama, from around the second half of the first millennium, and we see this. This is really small. This is, I cannot explain that level of detail that this bell has. And it's associated to another work that I'm gonna show you in this show, that is by the Tayrona, and that has these two figures looking in opposite ways, but in the 𝗙𝗏 version, they have a bat and a saurian, and in this case, it only has probably like a miniature version of the alligator bat god. Eventually, we move on to the Central Panama with this 𝗕cie𝗀𝗵𝗵𝗃 figure from 𝗕cie𝘀𝗵𝗃 that shows perhaps the same deity with the same elements that have been mentioning all along. Stylized antlers or stylized, deer antler with the emanations, whether they are snakes or saurians or alligator-like, fangs, claws, and but represented frontally. The other thing that I want you to pay attention to is the trapezoidal shapes that actually resemble not only the stylized antlers, but also the scales of the alligator or a snake, and also are the decorative element that serves as a frame for the entire composition. And those kinds of elements are going to be seen in this 𝗕𝗏𝗵𝗵 work, another one of my favorites in this collection, where we see the alligator heads in profile over here, in this case looking inwards, and then the stylized scales or trapezoids on the crenellations that decorate or serve as headdresses for the profiles of these alligators as well. And I think that these similarities are too close to be something that was done haphazardly or was some similarities that happened just out of luck. I think that there are some stylistic elements that prevailed in one place or another, depending also, as the technology and the dissemination of that technology was shared from one person to the other. Of course, it's not going to remain exactly the same, but the principles and the main elements are still there. They're representing the same or close to the same individuals or the same narratives, perhaps, or the same figures or type of figures, and more or less in the same way. It also depends on the amount of gold. And also, another thing that I wanted to remind the audience about is that when Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo did that trajectory between Panama and Colombia, he called that area Golden Castile, Castilla de Oro, because all the rivers brought alluvial gold, and everybody was wearing gold, even in Darién as well, which is an area that hasn't been explored at all because of the guerrilla, and the Darien Gap is a thick jungle. Also, that has been in the news lately because many people are going through the Darien jungle to eventually make their path to the United States and the rest of the Americas as immigrants. So it's not all that dense anymore, I am assuming, but it's still very dangerous. And that area is completely unexplored. But Oviedo speaks of people that were wearing bars, that ladies were wearing bars on their breasts, and the men were covering their penises with similar objects that look like shells, but also made out of gold. And those are objects that do not feature in any collection as far as of now in any museum in the world. So there's yet things to be discovered and excavated. So moving forward, we have this little guy that I told you about. This is from Central Panama, and how it is associated to the quimbaya poporos. That poporos were those vessels, and the people, sometimes these vessels were made in anthropomorphic shapes, but usually included a dipping stick that helped for the ingestion, or were used for the ingestion of hallucinogenic substances. At the same time, this combination of elements, anthropomorphic and zoomorphic, are combined in Central Panama with this figure found in El Caño in 2000, like around 10 years ago, that when positioned differently, you can see the two profiles of pelicans, or a man with claws that also attest to a very abstract way of identifying a human being. And later, lately with the Darien pendant, remember the two domes that cover the figure. We see this is an example of that Darien pendant from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I infer that this is the same figure as well that is another like more abstract representation of the crocodile or the feline or the crocodile bat deity that we have been talking all along. Eventually, we move to the eagle pendants from Veraguas that have, I'm sorry, I moved ahead of myself. The eagle pendants from Veraguas that may have a relationship with the Tayrona pendants. This double spiral that is another one of the exquisite examples that we have at DMA from the 𝗓𝗏 Gulf. And this particular one also that is a Tayrona piece that actually fits right in with how the 𝗕𝗀𝗁 people in central Panama make their necklaces in a way that you cannot see the figure, but they can recognize it within the creation of these elements. Among the Tayrona, we have these braided figures as well, and the one that is related to the central area of Panama that I showed you above. And again, the Veraguas toads that refer to, copious children or having copious of offspring, and the turtles also from Veraguas that associate these figures to the figures from the international period in the early part of the millennium. So in the end, what we see it is a huge conversation that these peoples are having and sharing, with the stylistic ideas and stylistic and also metallurgical technologies that actually help us to understand that they are not, even though they are speaking different languages and they're heterogeneous groups of people, they're speaking the same language that is the language of gold. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please.
In some ways, we were always told that the gold was sort of sun-related because it's the color of the sun and that people would use it. But then they using it for other deities. I mean, is it bat, crocodile, fertility, something more than that? I mean, it's kind of hard to say.
It is hard to say because they're using it, it's a everyday use material. So most of the people, whether they were in a hierarchy or they were people of importance within a society, they would use it in a nose ring, in an earring. But the ones that show this particular type of iconography associating birds of prey, felines, alligators, and bats are usually associated to caciques or chieftains. So those are associated to either the most important person in the clan or people within that circle.
So what I tell my kids is that animal power, so all of those images with ferocious animal power, so claws, teeth, whatever, are associated with societal power.
Exactly, or military prowess, or military power, or importance within the clan.
Yeah.
And usually associated with military prowess or power.
Was there anybody in what we now call Central America, who was doing what they did in Mexico, where they were writing down what people were telling them about their belief system?
Not really, unfortunately not. There were no good Franciscans in Panama, unfortunately. Not that we know of.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
When we're talking about this isthmus region of Panama, I know different areas, like I believe it was like further south when you get into like the rainforest area where there was more gold than almost any other metal, and it was almost common. What would be kind of the percentage? I mean, of course, yes, I'm aware some will of course be going by trade north and south, and gold's easy to transport. But what would the percentages kind of have been? Would there have been large amounts of gold compared to like copper or silver, or would it have been a more even match, or would it have been as rare kind of like Europe was?
Well, numerically speaking, I wouldn't know how to respond, but it was abundant enough for one of the chronicles to call the whole region Golden Castile. So the whole, like all the rivers apparently were bringing alluvial gold already. So like all the rivers from, let's say, Veraguas, which is kind of close to the Panamanian border with Costa Rica, to the Gulf of Urabá, all of those peoples were almost completely naked, but they all were clad in gold. So the best, you know, gold was like it was valuable because of probably because of the way and the significance it embodied when it was tooled for one of these important persons, or important caciques or chieftains, but also was something of, you know, pretty that everybody could use in a normal, you know, as part of their normal, you know, everyday wearing stuff.
Got it. Okay, and do we see much jewelry and artwork, again, made of like copper or silver or any of the other? Okay, so gold's kind of predominant. Okay, that makes sense.
Yes. The other ores would come like together, but the predominant ore was gold. Yeah. And still today, it's being exploited by mining companies in the area.
Tell me, are some of these images reflections of their spiritual beliefs?
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
how do we know that?
Well, we don't, but not because there's any document.
Believe that?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Just what leads us to believe that? Yes.
Well, the reasons that lead us to believe that is that most of these works, unless they have been, you know, illegally looted, which most of the times is the case as well, the ones that have been found in their original context are usually found in the funerary context associated with people of high hierarchies within the clan. So usually when we find, or when the archaeologists have found this in their original context, they find it around the body of a specific single, usually a man, but women have also been identified. And so usually what they have found is a central figure that is buried deeper inside, and then on the upper levels of that same funerary you know, structure, sometimes separated by litters of wood or canes that separate one level from the other. On the upper levels, there are other, like what would have constituted the guard of that principal figure, with less gold, but also with gold offerings. So we do know that it's associated to some sort of either purely hierarchical military significance or context, but we tend to believe also that the military leaders were also spiritual leaders and were also part of the cosmology. You know, were important beings in the cosmology, is another word to call religion, because we don't know if it was a religion as we know it today, but it was also part of the concept of that these people were the ones that were chosen to lead us, so we call it cosmology. But so we tend to think that one thing is associated to the other, especially in the context of ancient peoples of the Americas. So that's why those are what the inferences are associated to these funerary caches that are the original context from where these objects have been dug out.
Yes, the artists, they created these effigies. What was their hierarchical level among the communities, and what was their status?
That is a very interesting question. And I tend to think, and this is, again, something that we can only infer, but people that manage this technology, since they also were versed in the narrative that was associated to it must have had some sort of also like hierarchical importance within the clan, but maybe as people that were more in the knowledge of that spiritual world. So they were not only like artists, or they were not only like, oh, the people that know how to tool gold, but they also were in the know of this language, not only the language, but also the narrative that was part of their own idea of what place they were occupying in, not only in the physical world, but in the world that was, a spiritual world as well.
I have another question surrounding the technology to create these pieces. Is there evidence of the tools that were used spreading throughout the region, and was there improvement as time went on?
That is one of the biggest mysteries that I have never seen. I've rarely seen copper materials to make these works, and that's really like, one of the things that I find super mysterious, how these people could go to that detail without having other metal tools to tool them. Unfortunately, in the funerary caches that have been studied, scientifically or archaeologically, very little evidence of those materials. They have been found, but very, very little. And it's also like tweezers have been, like little things like that have been found in gold as well, and copper tools, but they are not as abundant as you might think if you think about the body of work that we have found across the entire region. We should probably find more, but maybe they were working with other tools that were perishable, like with wooden tools or smaller tools that unfortunately disintegrated. If they were copper, it's very possible that they disintegrated underground. But yes, there's definitely a disparity between the amount of things that could be associated in terms of tools to manufacture these objects versus the amount of objects that exist made in this fashion. The same can be said for molds as well. The molds hardly survive until this. Maybe an archaeologist could tell you more about this. Remember that I'm looking at all of these from an art historian's perspective, and perhaps people that are more into the digging part of the science could tell you, like, no, there are more evidence of that, but usually those are things that have been paid little attention, and perhaps we should look into that as well.
There was one thing that I was curious about. You had mentioned this culture being situated between the spheres of the Inca and Aztec, empires. I was curious if there's any parallels between 𝗔𝘀𝘁𝗵𝗺can culture and those other larger spheres, like something cool or noteworthy to show an interchange of ideas.
When there are some Aztec deities that do have similarities with the physical appearance, let's say, of this saurian or this god that I've been trying to identify in the 𝗔𝘀𝘁𝗵𝗺can area. And it's one of the manifestations of the avatars, if you want to call it, of 𝗕𝗫𝗄𝗵𝗁, the god of war. But it's only one of the avatars of the god of war, because he has many other ways in which he manifests himself. In terms of the Inca, very little approximation with that. But there are some other elements that do reoccur. For example, in South America, among the Inca, there's a step cross called the chacana, which is instead of like a cross with four, sticks, let's call it that way, it has like a step between the sticks. And that is something that sometimes surfaces in 𝗔𝘀𝘁𝗵𝗺can forms, and also the spirals or the step fret and spiral. Some elements that are more geometric do resurface in the 𝗔𝘀𝘁𝗵𝗺can area, but not in gold, but rather in ceramics, which is another vocabulary. Another but similar vocabulary. And in that sense, we see, for example, here that deity is represented in ceramics as well. but here's the bell pendant that I wanted to talk to you about and how it has moved throughout time. And also the other thing that I wanted to show you is that today, even today, in central Panama, there are people dancing with costumes that are made out of bark of trees. The triangles may be a decorative element, but also may be associated to the stingray spines that are usually part of the funerary caches where all these gold objects have been found. So I am thinking, like in Mexico and in Peru, many of the indigenous practices were adopted by Christianity after the conquest, as long as they were under a Christian context. They allowed some indigenous practices to follow up. And I think this is one of them in Panama. So we see all the elements I've been talking about, the antler, the fangs, and the snout. In this case, it's more like a monster, but not really like an alligator. But we see some of the elements that continue to be, that are similar to the deity that I think has been once and again reproduced in the gold in the Ithmo-Colombian area. So as far as like direct links to South or Mesoamerica, unfortunately I don't think we can really like come up with something more concrete, but there are elements that still speak, or make links to both cultural areas for sure.
Well, thank you so much to Dr. Orlando Hernández Ying for a fabulous presentation, and thank you all for coming out. And thank you again to the 𝗕𝗫𝗁𝗁 and the Family 𝗕𝗫𝗁 lecture series for making these lectures possible. Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you for coming.